The slides will be posted on our website. Next, on slide 2, I'd like to remind the audience that during this call, we will be making forward-looking statements under the Safe Harbor Act. These forward-looking statements are based on current information, assumptions, and expectations that are subject to change and involve risks and uncertainties that may cause actual results to differ materially from those contained in the forward-looking statements. These and other risk factors can be found in our most recent Form 10-K and Form 10-Q filed with the SEC, and as such, we advise you to refer to the risks and uncertainties of our business outlined in these filings to learn more about an investment in Ventyx Biosciences. Now, with great pleasure, I'd like to turn the call over to our Chief Executive Officer and President, Dr. Raju Mohan. Raju?
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to our conference call on VTX 3232 Phase 2 results. Before we dive into the data, let me introduce the Ventyx team here with me joining the call. Joining me are Mark Foreman, our Chief Medical Officer, and Matt Moore, our Chief Operating Officer. Also joining this call are Dr. Peter Libby, who is at Mass General Brigham Heart and Vascular Institute, and Dr. Antonio Abate, who is at University of Virginia School of Medicine. Both Dr. Libby and Dr. Abate are world experts in cardiovascular disease. Both are clinicians and thought leaders, and they will join us in the Q&A portion of this call, as well as Antonio Abate will present a few slides at the end of Ventyx's presentation. First, I'd like to thank you, a big thank you to the Ventyx team for all the work that has gone into the successful execution of this trial. To all our internal and external investigators, our CROs, our partners that worked with us tirelessly and closely and were integral to the success of the program, I am truly grateful. Moreover, I would like to thank the individuals who participated in this trial and who are a constant reminder to us as to why we do and believe in what we do every day. And finally, a thank you to all who are joining this call. Turning now to slide 4, please. As you're aware, and we've previously disclosed this, the Phase 2 trial was a placebo-controlled trial of VTX 3232, a NLRP3 inhibitor. This trial was both designed as a monotherapy trial and a trial in combination with semaglutide, a GLP-1 receptor agonist. As a headline, we believe that the data that we will review this afternoon and that Mark will elaborate shows VTX 3232 as a potent, oral, once-daily drug demonstrating sustained reduction in NLRP3 and IL-1 beta-driven biomarkers that have been unambiguously associated with significantly increasing cardiovascular risk factors associated with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and related comorbidities. So let me briefly highlight the top-line results and key takeaways, and then Mark will get into more granular details and data in his presentation. So, see in the first bullet, approximately 80% reduction in hsCRP was achieved within the first week of dosing and sustained throughout the 12-week dosing period in patients who remained on therapy. Second bullet, a majority of patients in this study achieved hsCRP levels below 2 milligrams per liter, also at week 12. Now, just briefly to put hsCRP in context, Paul Ridker and others have recently shown, and we reference the Lancet publication on this slide, that CRP levels were a strong predictor of cardiovascular risk, were a stronger predictor of CV risk than LDL cholesterol levels in more than 27,000 healthy American women followed over a mean of 8 years. Additionally, patients with hsCRP greater than 2 milligrams per liter were at higher risk of major adverse cardiovascular events and mortality. So now moving to the next biomarker, we saw significant reductions in IL-6 levels, interleukin-6 levels, to below the threshold for cardiovascular risk. And given that IL-6 is a pleiotropic cytokine, one needs to find the sweet spot between significant reductions in cardiovascular risk while maintaining immune homeostasis, and Mark will elaborate further on this in his presentation. We also saw significant reductions in lipoprotein A. This is bullet number 3 here on your slide. Lipoprotein A is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and elevated levels of Lp(a) are associated with increased cardiovascular risk in both primary and secondary prevention populations, regardless of baseline hsCRP. On bullet number 4, consistent with anti-inflammatory effects of our drug, VTX3232, we saw significant reductions in liver inflammation as measured by MRI with a CT1 imaging. So as you'll see, the totality of data that we will show you demonstrate that VTX3232 also has an independent and clinically meaningful benefit on inflammation as an add-on to semaglutide. This was the cohort trial with the combination with a GLP-1 receptor agonist. Now, on the safety assessment from the study, VTX3232 was well tolerated, and all rates of adverse events were comparable to placebo, both in the monotherapy arm and in combination with semaglutide. And finally, VTX3232 showed no effect on weight loss, either as monotherapy or in combination with semaglutide, now showing conclusively that NLRP3 inhibition has no effect in humans in promoting weight loss. So with this, I will hand over to Mark, who's going to walk you through the detailed data set. Actually, I have one more slide before I hand it to Mark, so let's just move on to slide 5. Slide 5 highlights the importance of NLRP3 and its role in relationship to biomarkers that we have now highlighted, or we will highlight in the results section. Inflammasomes are multi-protein complexes, as you can see on the right-hand side, that are activated in response to molecular hallmarks of infection or cellular injury. NLRP3 activation results in the production of IL-1 beta, IL-18, and IL-1 beta induces IL-6, as shown in the cartoon on the right-hand side as well. IL-6, the cytokine IL-6, in turn elicits systemic inflammation, including hepatic production of acute phase proteins such as CRP or hsCRP that I had just highlighted earlier, and other downstream reactants such as fibrinogen and other markers that Mark will also discuss. Now, data in the last decade has focused, so in addition to the cartoon on the right-hand side, the similar pathway is now also described on the left-hand side of this slide, and so I'm not going to repeat that. But data in the last decade has focused on the aberrant activation of NLRP3 inflammasome in tissues where NLRP3 is upregulated, and its direct link to a broad range of diseases, including metabolic, cardiovascular, rheumatic, and neurodegenerative diseases. By inhibiting NLRP3, we have shown with VTX3232 that we have the opportunity to significantly downregulate cytokines such as IL-1 beta, IL-18, IL-6, as well as acute phase reactants that have been unambiguously associated with significantly increasing cardiovascular risk factors. So with that, now is my turn to hand over the presentation to our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Mark Foreman, to walk you through the data. Mark?
Thanks, Raju. I'm really excited to share the results from our phase 2 trial with VTX3232 and cardiometabolic disease risk. I would like to start by reiterating our thanks to the participants, the trial investigators, and study team who made this work possible. Now turning to slide 7. I'm going to spend a few minutes reviewing the study design. This was a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial with VTX3232 as a monotherapy and add-on to the GLP-1 agonist semaglutide. As VTX3232 is a mouthful, and moving forward, I'll abbreviate as 3232. Trial participants were 18 years of age with a BMI of 30 to 42 and CRP levels of at least 2 mg per liter. The CRP cutoff of 2 mg per liter was selected based on evidence that residual low-grade inflammation is associated with increased cardiovascular risk. Specifically, canakinumab, an antibody to IL-1 beta in the CANTOS study, demonstrated that reducing CRP levels to less than 2 mg per liter was associated with a 25% risk reduction for future cardiovascular events. Following screening, subjects were randomized to one of 4 treatment arms, as Raju described, specifically 30 milligrams of 3232 once daily or matching placebo, or a combination of semaglutide administered weekly plus 3232 or matching placebo. Study participants were not blinded to semaglutide, which was dosed per label starting at 0.25 mg per week and reaching 1 mg per week for the last 4 weeks of the study. The treatment period was 12 weeks with a safety follow-up period of 4 weeks. Turning to the study objectives, the primary endpoint of the study was safety and tolerability. The secondary endpoint was change from baseline in hsCRP over time. Now, importantly, we're going to show data with 2 analysis populations. The full analysis set includes all participants who have received at least 1 dose of study drug. A second modified analysis set excludes participants in 3232 treatment groups with plasma levels below the limit of quantification at the end of the treatment period. The reason for this analysis is that in clinical trials to date, 3232 has predictable PK with a low coefficient of variation. Based on a half-life of 17 hours, it takes approximately 4 to 5 days for drug levels to fall below the limit of quantification. Thus, this analysis set includes only participants with objective evidence that they took study drug as intended. The modified analysis set excludes 8 individuals from the 3232 monotherapy treatment arm and 7 from the 3232 semaglutide combination treatment arm. Next slide, please. Slide 8 shows the disposition of study participants. A total of 175 individuals were randomized and treated. Overall, 153 participants completed treatment, corresponding to about 87% of the study population. The completion rate was generally similar across treatment arms, with slightly higher rates in the semaglutide arms of the study. Primary reasons for discontinuation included subjects lost to follow-up, adverse events, and withdrawal of consent. Of note, the rate of discontinuation due to adverse events was similar across all treatment arms. Next slide, please. Slide 9 shows the baseline participant characteristics and was generally balanced across treatment groups. The mean age was 45 to 50 years, and the trial participants were predominantly white and female. Black or African Americans constituted approximately 25% of the study population. As intended, the study population was consistent with an obese cohort with cardiovascular risk factors. Specifically, the mean weight was about 100 kilograms with an average BMI of 36. The mean percent body fat was approximately 45%, and mean liver fat was approximately 8%. Importantly, the mean hsCRP at baseline was 4.1 mg per liter, above the threshold we referenced earlier for increased cardiovascular risk, which was 2 mg per liter. The median IL-6 levels was 3.7 nanograms per liter, also above the threshold for increased cardiovascular risk of 1.65 nanograms per liter reported in the CANTOS trial with canakinumab. I'd like you to remember these thresholds as I present data later in the presentation with 3232. Next slide, please. Starting with safety, slide 10 summarizes our data, the primary endpoint of the study. This slide includes data from the full analysis set, but the results are essentially the same when using the modified analysis set I referenced earlier. Overall, 3232 was well tolerated both as monotherapy and combination with semaglutide. A few points to highlight. First, the majority of treatment-emergent adverse events, or TEAEs, were mild to moderate in severity and were balanced across treatment groups. Second, all adverse events of infection were mild or moderate in severity, There were no serious or opportunistic infections, and all TEAEs of infection were assessed as unrelated to study treatment. Third, there was one SAE in the study in the 3232 monotherapy treatment arm. This was an AE of major depressive disorder resulting in hospitalization in a participant with a known history of depression. This SAE was assessed as unrelated to study drug. Next, there were 4 AEs leading to study discontinuation, 1 in each of the treatment arms. And lastly, there were 4 grade 3 TEAEs, 2 in the placebo arm, including LFT increased and blood CPK increased, 1 in the 3232 monotherapy arm, the AE of major depressive disorder that was also an SAE, and 1 AE of neutropenia in a participant receiving both 3232 and semaglutide. The neutropenia resolved within 1 week upon discontinuation of study treatment. Overall, I'm really happy to report that 3232 demonstrated a benign safety profile with no evidence of increased risk of infection. Moving to slide 11. On the next few slides, I'll review data from our secondary endpoint, hsCRP. As a reminder, increased levels of CRP, a marker of inflammation, is associated with increased cardiovascular risk. Recently, the American College of Cardiology, in a 2025 scientific consensus statement, recommended measuring hsCRP in clinical practice to identify individuals at increased inflammatory risk. Here we show that 3232 led to rapid and durable reductions in hsCRP over the 12-week treatment period. Let me walk you through this slide in more detail. The panel on the left, the data in this slide is from the full analysis set, with the panel on the left showing the percent change from baseline over time. The right panel shows the observed values of hsCRP over the 12-week treatment period. Semaglutide alone shows a modest reduction in hsCRP, corresponding to approximately 28% at the end of the 12 weeks. In contrast, with both presentations of the data, 3232 administered either as monotherapy or combination with semaglutide resulted in deep reduction in CRP, with the majority of participants below 2 mg per liter at 1 week, the first time point that it was measured. This corresponded to a median CRP reduction of approximately 80%. The reduction in CRP was sustained over the 12-week treatment period below the threshold for reduced cardiovascular risk at all time points. And the changes from baseline are statistically significant, with p-values less than 0.0001 at all time points. Moving to slide 12. Here we show the 2 complementary analyses of the hsCRP data. On the left, we show the full analysis set, which includes all participants who received at least 1 dose of study drug. This is the same data that was presented on the previous slide. On the right, we show the modified analysis set that excludes subjects with 3232 drug concentrations below the limit of quantification at the end of the treatment period, thus including only participants with objective evidence of taking the drug as intended. On the left, the full analysis plan shows a small decrease in the magnitude of CRP reduction over time. In contrast, with the modified analysis set, we see the impact of excluding subjects with no measurable drug in plasma. In this analysis, the decrease in CRP is stable over time, approximately an 80% reduction from baseline. Again, with both analyses, these results are statistically significant, with p-values less than 0.0001 for all time points. Turning to slide 13. This slide is focused on the CRP reductions at week 12, the end of the treatment period. As in the prior slide, both full and modified analysis sets are included. On the left, in the full analysis set, 3232 was associated with a 64 to 75% reduction in median CRP levels as monotherapy and add-on to semaglutide. These reductions were statistically significant, with p-values again less than 0.0001. The modified analysis set in the graph on the right demonstrates the impact of subjects with no measurable drug levels in the blood at the end of the treatment period. There's a 5 to 14% increase in the percent reduction of CRP relative to the full analysis set, with a median reduction in CRP of 78 to 80%. Furthermore, the reduction in CRP when 3232 was administered with semaglutide was significantly different from semaglutide alone, where a 28% decrease in CRP was observed. The observed reductions in hsCRP are comparable to those observed with biologics targeting IL-1 and approach those observed with biologics targeting IL-6. Turning to slide 14. Now, this is the last data set that I'm going to present on CRP. As I mentioned earlier, several landmark studies have demonstrated that reducing CRP below 2 mg per liter is associated with reduced risks for future cardiovascular events. And the American College of Cardiology Scientific Consensus Statement recommends targeted anti-inflammatory approaches in primary and secondary CV prevention, with the goal of reducing CRP levels as a biomarker for cardiovascular risk. On this slide, we show the responder analysis of the proportion of subjects achieving the target threshold of hsCRP. In the modified analysis set shown here, 69% and 82% of study participants receiving 3232 as monotherapy and combination with semaglutide respectively achieved CRP levels less than 2 mg per liter. These results were statistically significant with p-values less than 0.0001. In contrast, only 38% of study participants achieved this level of reduction on semaglutide alone. To summarize the CRP data, once daily 3232 reduces inflammatory risk with CRP levels below 2 mg per liter in the majority of study subjects. Moving now to slide 15. Now I'm going to pause for a moment to frame up the next set of data. As Raju reviewed earlier, the NLRP inflammasome regulates inflammation through a well-defined cascade of cytokines and acute phase reactants. Specifically, NLRP3 activation mediates the release of IL-1 beta and IL-18, and IL-1 beta in turn leads to increased levels of IL-6. IL-6 stimulates generalized inflammation, including acute phase reactants in the liver and systemic inflammatory changes. In this study, we measured several biomarkers within this NLRP3 axis as markers of activation of the innate immune system. First, I'll start with IL-6. High IL-6 levels correlate with greater risk for cardiovascular events, including mortality, both in the general population and among individuals with existing coronary syndromes. In the CANTO study with canakinumab, reducing IL-6 below 1.65 nanograms per liter was associated with reduced cardiovascular risk. In the current study, we measured IL-6 levels at baseline and at the end of treatment. In the full analysis set shown on the left, 3232 was associated with significant reductions in median IL-6 concentrations to 1.6 nanograms per liter. In the modified analysis set on the right, IL-6 concentrations were further reduced to a level of 1.35 nanograms per liter. These IL-6 levels at the end of treatment are below the threshold of 1.65 nanograms per liter that, again, we've discussed has been associated with reduced cardiovascular risk and is comparable to biologics targeting IL-1. Furthermore, the reduction in IL-6 complements the action of semaglutide that was not associated with changes in IL-6 levels. Targeting inflammation in cardiovascular disease needs to balance benefit-risk for patients. We need to find the sweet spot for reducing inflammation while limiting infection risk. To date, 3232 reduced both CRP and IL-6 to target levels associated with reduced cardiovascular risk without evidence of increased risk of infection. Next slide, please. On slide 16, we extend the data with a panel of additional biomarkers in the NLRP3 pathway, including lipoprotein A, the acute phase reactant fibrinogen, and the systemic inflammatory biomarker
test there. Sorry,
Yeah,
maybe we'll tackle that.
who wants to take that?
Well,
Antonio?
this is Peter. I just would like to say that what we just saw was a factorial study with a GLP-1 receptor agonist. And GLP-1 receptor agonists are going to become standard of care pretty soon for people who have high cardiovascular risk. And I think that the idea that you could combine what this study showed was, at least in the data set that we just saw, that the word used was orthogonal. So you're going to get an additive effect. So it would be wonderful to see a study that actually had an active therapeutic that worked by a different mechanism that showed, as we saw here, some additivity. So that would be I congratulated Ventyx when I saw the design in going head to head and actually showing that it was additive to a therapy that is going to be inevitably gaining much more traction going forward.
Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. And maybe one last question. My apologies. Team, this is for the Ventyx team. Were you able to see differences in CRP reduction based on where patients started, like a baseline 2 versus a baseline 3 versus a 4? Like, is there a different degree of reduction based on where you start off? And thank you again for answering my questions.
So the simple answer is no, we haven't seen a difference, but I think there's a lot more analyses that we need to do in the data. The data is really just hot off the press. But I think the percent reduction, one of the things that we've talked about in the past, and I would want to emphasize again, the percent reduction is in some ways is more of an arbitrary distinction, because if you start at 10 and you go to 1 or 2, you have a 90% reduction. And if you start at 3.5 and go to 1 or 2, you have a 50% reduction. So it's really not the percent reduction that you really want to focus on, but the level of reduction. And as you heard from Antonio, CRP is a continuous variable as a risk factor. So the lower, the better. And so and we're going to get some of that data as, the question that was asked about the RP trial, where patients are starting at much higher levels. We're going to start getting some information about how this mechanism distinguishes with people with low-grade inflammation versus really high-grade inflammation.
Yeah, just a quick more add very quickly is in the CAPS trial, you had a much higher dynamic range. Yes, you went from folks that came in at 2 all the way to 30, 40 mg per liter. And in all cases, we dropped it down to the same levels we talked about today, which is below 2, below 1 in some cases. So it's really independent where you start out, because we're completely blocking the pathway. It's not like we have a partial NLRP3 inhibition. We're completely blocking it. So, what we've seen, at least from studies where we've had a much larger dynamic range, it doesn't really matter. But as Mark said, it's going to have to be bear out in more studies. But it really doesn't matter. The drug works independent of where the starting levels are.
Can I make another comment on the mechanisms, Antonio? I know we may be running out of time, but I do think the IL-6 trials and the Ventyx trials are going to be complementary, because you're inhibiting the cascade at different levels. And we know that CRP is a marker and it's not really a mediator. IL-6 is upstream and it may be a mediator, but we have to prove that. We have to show that blocking IL-6 is actually beneficial. And we know that IL-1 beta blockade has been beneficial in other trials. But what really may be affecting the plaque is really the inflammasome, the pyroptosis, the events that are more linked to the inflammasome at the plaque level, and destabilizing those plaques and causing atherothrombosis. So, I'm looking forward to all of these results because they're going to be complementary.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Yaz. And let's be fair to the other folks. Let's move quickly. Operator.
Our next question is from Derek Archila with Wells Fargo. Please proceed.
Hey, good afternoon, and congrats on the data. Just 2 quick ones from us. So maybe just in terms of the Sanofi and in terms of first negotiation rights, I guess when does the clock start for them? Is it now that the data is reported? So just remind us of the logistics there. And I guess how do you think this data kind of further validates 3232's Parkinson's data? And I guess, were there any key neurobiomarkers looked at in this trial? Thanks.
We didn't look at any neurobiomarkers in this trial. We didn't look at CSF. We don't need to torture folks in here because we did that in the CNS trial. We're not going to get into details of specific timelines in terms of the ROFN, but stay tuned, right? The key point is, with this data set, we now start the cycle of our right of first negotiation with Sanofi. And we are sensitive to how much we get into it, but that'll play itself out, and then we will disclose things at the appropriate time, Derek.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Operator?
Our next question is from Jeff Jones with Oppenheimer and Company. Please proceed.
Thanks, guys, and great update and detailed presentation. Most of mine have been asked, but just, I guess, one quick one. If you look at 3232 versus 2735, any differences in potency between the two, and could either of these molecules be applied here in this indication, or as we think about cardiovascular indications here?
Yeah, so the converse is 2735 is a peripherally restricted compound, so you cannot apply it in the same pathways as we did with the CNS cascade, which was affecting neurodegenerative diseases, right? So that we showed in the 323 biomarker trial. In terms of potency and of the two compounds, without getting into details here, you've seen the numbers. They're both very potent compounds. They're both very selective. They both are now QD drugs, so we can hit the target with QD doses that are in a highly tractable range. We haven't decided on the QD doses that we will actually take into phase 3 trials because, as you know, these trials have all been one single dose, whether it was the biomarker for CNS, whether this was a obesity trial, and the same thing with the RP. Very confident in the safety margins of these drugs, right? So 3232 has a very wide safety margin over and above the highest exposure tested that we had showed with the 40 milligram dose, right? It's in blood, it's somewhere between 40 to 50 fold towards the NOAEL. So wide safety margins, good potency of both compounds, two distinct chemotypes. So they're distinct chemotypes, both with safety profiles that we have shown you. So yes, there's a clear option for 3232 in cardiovascular disease. There's not an option for 2735 in CNS.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Of course.
Our next question is from Kaveri Pullman with Clear Street. Please proceed.
Yes, good evening. Congrats on the great results, and thanks for taking my questions. Can you tell us, how does this data look like to you based on your expectations and perhaps Sanofi's expectations? And does weight loss data change any of your thinking or your plans about the drug? And my second question is about, the safety profile. If you can tell us how the safety profile look like in comparison with IL-6 targeting agents, one of which was already discussed, and, some of the other NLRP3 inhibitors in the clinic. Thank you.
Yeah, I think at least 4 different questions on that, Kaveri. So let me first talk about what does Sanofi think of this data. We'll have to see their reaction. This is the first time we're publicly disclosing this data, so they have not had a chance to see it. I'm hoping some of them have seen it today, and they will see it in the course of our interactions with them as part of ROFN, right? How do we see this weight loss data? We went in with little to no expectation on weight loss. There was no human biology, but given 3 or 4 trials in the mouse, we put this to rest and then showed the benefit, as we've highlighted and Peter said, over and above the GLP-1 agonist, number 2. In terms of how this compares to other NLRP3, obviously anything I tell you is going to be biased, but we have a portfolio of safe, potent compounds with QD dosing. And what we've done is shared the life of these compounds. We've shown you the exposures, we've shown you biomarkers, we've shown you safety, shown you efficacy in the CAPS trial, we've shown you phase 1 data, we've shown you the CNS trial, exhaustive data here on 3232. And I just don't think there's any, and you can look, there's any other compound out there that has shown such depth of data and such a clean safety profile. So, that's as much as an objective answer I can give you.
That's very helpful. Thanks for the color.
Of course.
Our final question is from Alex Thompson with Stifel. Please proceed.
Hey, great. Congrats on the data, and thanks for taking our questions. I guess on the brain penetrant aspect of 3232, without this sort of neuroinflammatory thesis related to weight loss, how are you thinking about that, when you're thinking about the path forward for 3232 here versus 2735 potentially in cardiovascular disease? And then maybe any hypotheses as to why the DIO mouse model did not translate in this context? Thanks.
We have no hypotheses as to why the DIO mouse doesn't translate or not. And the answer is there are many more instances of mouse models not reproducing, especially when you have something that has to do with as complex as feeding behavior. Mice will eat themselves to death, literally, right? And I've been in vivariums and watched from a distance these models. And on the other side, there is no human biology linking feeding behavior with NLRP3, as opposed to what we've seen in the CNS studies with links to microglia, inflammation, the astrocytes. While the story is not complete there, at least you have links that are being formed. There was nothing here, right? So this is really a human experiment in the absence of in vitro biology, as opposed to mouse studies where there was, at least 3 or 4 studies that had shown this, and they're all consistent. So there's no doubt in my mind that in mice there's weight loss. It's not working through NLRP3, at least in a human for sure. And the good news is that you put it to rest now, and you move on to all the benefits that we've shown you with this compound, both with GLP as ones, but also standalone, that we've highlighted that Peter and Antonio showed the excitement for, right? And I think you had a second part of that, Alex?
Yeah, I guess with the brain penetrance here, if you don't need that for, the cardiovascular context, how are you thinking about, prioritization of Parkinson's, those diseases versus cardiovascular disease when you think about 3232 versus 2735?
Yeah, so 2735 is right now in recurrent pericarditis, and I guess we're looking forward to sharing those results this quarter on that compound. So that, for now, that compound is committed to that trial, and it's got tremendous potential of lowering CRP, and we are hoping that translates into efficacy, as you've seen with ARCALYST. And 3232, we've shown biomarkers in the CNS. We've also shown effects you saw today. 3232, again, I'm not being cagey, but 3232 has a relationship in the form of a ROFN with Sanofi. So we can come back and decide where we position these compounds, but let us play this out. We've obviously got internal planning now. We've been planning for multiple scenarios with an incredible team. We have all of the drug product ready to go. We're at the starting gate, but let's just play out the ROFN and stay tuned for next steps with compounds that we have in the portfolio. Yeah, fair?
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Of course.
We have reached the end of our question and answer session. I would like to turn the floor back over to Dr. Raju Mohan for closing remarks.
Yeah, my closing remarks are to thank everybody who was on this call. Thank you for the questions. Thanks to the KOLs. Thanks to all the analysts who took the call. Thanks to our investors, who I'm sure we'll interact with in the future. Really thanks to the subjects who've been with, not just on this trial, but on our previous trials. And really thanks to my team. I have an amazing team here. Thank you, Dr. Abate. Thank you, Dr. Libby. We will continue our relationship. And again, this call is now done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.